This is what y'all wanted to discuss. So I had you read today just a chapter of a book that this philosopher, Theodore Sider, co-wrote called Riddles of Existence, which is basically a book about metaphysics, about problems in metaphysics. And one of the problems that comes up in this field is personal identity. More specifically, what makes a person the same over time? We say you're the same person, that you were when you were a child, in some sense, right? When you look at baby pictures, Sider says you can identify that that person is you, right? But there are obvious ways that you've changed, right, since you were a kid. Obvious ways that you've changed since you've been in college or even within the last 2 years, right? Maybe very significant ways. So how do we figure out the answer to this question, what makes a person the same over time? Well, there are a few different answers that have been given. A lot of them are lacking. We're just going to kind of discuss them today. Go over them and see what you all think about them. So the concept of personal identity is concerned with this basic question. What makes a person the same over time? Sometimes people say person or thing. What makes a person or thing the same over time? Well, Sider in this piece makes a distinction between two different kinds of sameness that we can discuss in order to help answer this question. He makes the difference between qualitative sameness and what he calls numerical sameness. Qualitative sameness is sameness regarding something hasn't changed at all over time. So if we look at this table and no particles have been added or subtracted from this table over the last 20 minutes, then we say that the table is qualitatively the same as it was 20 minutes ago. So we can talk about something being qualitatively the same if it hasn't undergone any changes. But of course, when we talk about something being the same over time, we normally don't really utilize this conception because we recognize that things in the universe do change in subtle ways, right? Even your body is constantly changing, right? Cells are dying, those cells are being replaced, new cells are being formed, your thoughts are changing. And so when we're talking about what makes a person the same over time, Sider thinks it's useful to try to answer that question based on the idea of numerical sameness. Something is numerically the same, he says, if its identity remains the same, or if it doesn't change in relevant respects. We can say a thing is numerically the same if it retains its identity or essence. What makes the thing the thing? If it retains that. Or in other words, doesn't change in the relevant respects. Now, what these respects are going to differ depending on what we're talking about. When we're talking about people, for example, we recognize that people's bodies can change, but they're still the same person a lot of times, right? I just brought up the example about cells. There's blood circulating in your body right now. That's not staying still, right? Your heart is beating, digestion is occurring. There are all sorts of physical chemical, biological changes occurring in your body, but we still think you're the same person. So this is generally what we mean when we're talking about a person being the same over time. Numerical sameness. Philosophy is concerned with trying to outline and justify what these conditions are for numerical sameness. So this is what we're going to be discussing primarily today. As noted, especially when we're talking about people, it does not seem to depend that much on physicality, right? If you start hitting the gym and you get really buff or something, or you get really lean, generally people will say you're still the same person, right? Or if you gain a few pounds or lose a few pounds, people aren't going to say you've turned into a different person magically, right? So when it comes to people, it doesn't seem like our identity is based on just what our body is doing or what our body is like. Cells change. Biological and chemical processes are going on in your body. So an important question arises. If it doesn't depend on physicality, what makes a person the same over time, what does it depend on? Well, a few different answers have been given to this question. Sider works through 3 different possible answers in this piece. What's the first potential answer he looks at? What makes a person the same over time?
Their mentality?
That is something he discusses later. Does anybody remember the first thing mentioned in the reading? But yeah, that's a good consideration. We're going to talk about that. How about the soul? Right? Maybe it's the case that we all have a soul, a unique soul, and that this soul is what determines whether or not a person is the same over time. Because we each have a soul that is unique to us, and our soul doesn't change, and it's immaterial. Well, maybe personal identity depends on the kind of soul that a person has. The reason that we're able to distinguish between you and me and say we're not the same people is because we have different souls. Maybe that's a potential answer. The reason these people say that we're able to identify that the person in the baby pictures is you is because that person has the same soul as you, right? When you're looking at your own baby pictures, that person has the same soul that you have. The soul doesn't change, right? So maybe it's the soul that makes us a person, makes a person the same over time. Yeah.
Who's to say the soul doesn't change?
It's generally assumed in philosophy and theology that the soul doesn't change. But that's a good question to ask. Yeah, maybe it does. Or perhaps another question you might ask, which is even more basic, is do we actually have any good evidence that the soul exists? Right? religion and philosophy, sometimes they invoke the soul as potential answers to this question and like questions. But do we have any like scientific or physical evidence that the soul exists? Can we measure it? Can we look at it using a scientific instrument?
Wasn't there that one theory that like the body loses 5 pounds after you die?
I think I've heard that before. I don't know what that's based on though.
That's just water weight.
Could be
Well,
gas,
you
could
just
be water,
dehydrate with
right?
that.
Yeah, I've heard of an experiment where somebody measured the weight of the body before and after death, and there was a difference, yeah. Is that the soul? Well, it could be
Does
just
that
gases or liquids leaving the body, perhaps.
Yeah, would that mean that babies being born premature below 5 pounds don't have a soul?
I don't think that's what they would say, no.
And does that mean I can play golf with them? No soul.
That's two very different things. This is
So-
about death of an adult.
Although this might be a good potential answer to the question, there are obviously some problems with it, right? The first thing is that we're not sure if the soul actually exists. Of course, contemporary scientists and physicists and chemists and biologists who espouse a reductionist, naturalistic, materialistic view of the world is going to say, look, there is no such thing as a non-physical, immortal, immaterial soul. Okay, everything is made of matter and energy. This thing doesn't exist. Okay, it's not a good answer for personal identity. This question of personal identity. And it seems that based on our scientific findings that have been coming out the past few decades, that our mental states seem to have a very intimate relationship with our physical states, or in other words, our brain states, right? If you remove a part of somebody's brain, that affects their consciousness, right, and their experience in the universe. When we talk about, people dying, it's generally accepted or presumed that when the body dies, the soul or the consciousness or whatever it is also goes with it, right? There are no detectable psychological processes going on in the person after the body dies. So not only can we not prove that the soul exists, but recent scientific findings provide support for the idea that whatever is going on in our minds, in our consciousnesses that we might liken to the soul, seems to depend on our body, and more specifically our brain. So if it's true that what's going on in our minds, what's going on in our consciousnesses is somehow dependent on what's going on in our body and brain in an intimate way, that might provide support for the idea that, look, maybe everything that is going on in our minds is just physical after all, right? It's just certain neuronal firings, certain neurotransmitters going through certain ion channels. So this idea of an immaterial soul or essence that allows us to be conscious and have these experiences, well, there doesn't seem to be a lot of good evidence for that.
Does that answer to certain immaterial parts of the brain that, while everybody's brain is essentially the same, varies for each person individually? Something like personality, something like gender, something like personality disorders.
Yeah.
Does that answer for that?
Sure. I mean, if we look at the evidence that science has provided us with that shows us the kind of relationship that the brain has to the mind. I think if we looked at all of our individual brains, they will be different, right? Yeah, no, number of folds will be different, you know, all different kinds of physical differences between our brains. That might provide an answer to why we have different personalities, different views of the world, different genders. Yeah? I think that's what the contemporary scientific view would say. Like, yeah, if you want to figure out why somebody is different from you, just look at their brain. Their brain's going to be different.
So, hypothetically, if you take the brain of somebody, if you take the brain of a narcissist, and then you take the brain of somebody who is not a narcissist, would you be able to find any physical discernible difference?
I think so. Yeah. Now, maybe not very many, but I think you would see some differences in like neuronal structure, the different kinds of webs that are formed between the neurons in the brain. Yeah. And if you wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at the brain because of the state of the science that we have right now, you know, you could look at behavior, stuff like that, or biological chemical levels, you know, hormone levels, those sorts of things that are physical at the end of the day, the scientists are going to say. So some people think it's the soul that makes a person who they are, but based on the physical evidence that we have, it doesn't seem like this is a good enough answer because it raises more questions than questions it solves. So Sider thinks the soul is not a good answer to this question of what makes a person the same over time. The next thing he considers is what he calls continuity in space-time, spatiotemporal continuity. If we can just kind of look at an object and we can track, you know, where it is in space, how it moves through space, and record all of that data, we can determine if something is the same over time by looking at if there is a continuous series of causal events and relationships with respect to the existence of that thing or not. For example, if we were going to use this conception to try to determine if this trash can is the same over time, we would look at, well, where has this trash can been in the past? When was it moved here, right? If we look at, you know, if we try to determine if this trash can was the same trash can that was here 30 minutes ago, right? We would just think about, well, did anybody replace the trash can here? Has the trash can been sitting here the whole time? Is there a continuous series of events in space-time that could make sense of why it's here right now and what its properties are? It's a very kind of physical way of trying to understand the sameness of a thing, right? If I threw this marker at you, you know, and then you hit it with a bat or something back at me, and I'm holding it again, we would just look at that train of events and say, okay, yeah, I threw a particular marker at you. It had some sort of causal relationship with the bat and came back at me, and now I'm holding it again. That's why I know it's the same, right? It didn't magically vanish and then a new marker spontaneously appeared in my hand, right? We can explain easily using causation and using physics that this is the same marker as the one that I threw at you and you hit back at me. So it's just kind of like a very scientific, physical way of trying to explain sameness. The problem is, although this will help us track whether an object has changed significantly, whether an object is the same object that we interacted with before, posing this as an answer doesn't tell us what personhood is. right? It doesn't tell us what makes a person a person. This answer is only going to tell us whether or not something is the same as it was before, but not what makes up that thing, or what makes that thing the thing that it is. Does that make sense? So this is a useful answer for tracking how and why an object or a person changes, perhaps, but it doesn't tell us what the essence of personhood is. Or in other words, what makes a person a person? As opposed to what makes an object an object. Why these are different. If they are different at all. Or what makes you the person that you are, as opposed to the person that I am. Because this doesn't give us an answer as to what personhood actually is, what makes a person, this is a good way of describing what determines if an object is the same over time, but not a person. Okay, and this is something also that Sider says. He says that spatiotemporal continuity seems to only work with objects and not people. After all, if it doesn't tell us what a person is, we can track where your body has been, over the course of the last however many years you've been alive, but that doesn't tell us if you become a different person or not. Say from a transformative experience, or say from a particularly traumatic event, or something like that, right? Sometimes we talk about, oh yeah, he's the same guy he's always been. But then sometimes people undergo experiences that radically change them, right? And we will use words like, oh, Jim is not the same person he used to be, right? And that, whatever are the conditions for us saying that, Jim is not the same person he used to be, is not explained by this, right? We can track, what has happened to Jim's body throughout his life, but just continuity in space-time doesn't tell us why Jim is a different person and what makes Jim a different person than he was before, right? Nothing about understanding or describing how his body moves through space and moves through time is going to tell us, why is Jim different? How do we know that he's different? How do we know that he's a different person? So this answer is good when it comes to objects like tables and chairs and rocks and trash cans, but not so good when it comes to actually describing people and what makes a person the same over time. Finally, and this is perhaps the most convincing answer that has been given so far, some people think it's psychological continuity that makes a person the same over time. That is, continuity in one's psychological states. That is, what is going on in your mind, in your consciousness? Is there a continuous series of psychological states that you undergo, whether or not you are conscious of them? Presumably there is, right? We can track from the moment that you've been born that you have had certain desires, certain emotions, right? A certain experience of the world. And it's not like there are any gaps between what is going on in your mind, right? It's just one psychological state after another. It's continuous. And we say that you're the same person you were when you were a kid because there's been an unending, continuous chain of psychological processes that has been going on in your mind since the time that we're concerned with. Now you might think, well, I sleep, and that seems to be a break. Well, that's a break in your conscious experience, but presumably there's unconscious stuff happening while you're asleep, right? Your mind is still working even if you're not aware of it, right? So some people think it's psychological continuity that makes a person the same over time. We say that someone is the same person that they were 5 years ago if we can show or argue justifiably that, look, they've had psychological states during this whole 5-year period. There was never a break in them, right? He was sad one moment, happy the next, continuous series of psychological states and processes occurring. It's not as if somebody froze you and froze your mental processes in place and then started them up again or something and tinkered with them in between. It's not how humans work. But of course, this potential answer isn't without its problems either. There's one problem that Sider brings up that's known as the duplication problem. Does anybody remember this from the reading? It goes a little something like this. Let's say we're trying to determine whether or not you're the same over time after you have been cloned. Your brain, your body, and your mind, all of your memories and stuff have been duplicated. So let's say you were born in, 2003, right? And up until 2023, you were just growing up, you were the person who you were. But then in 2023, within the last few weeks, a scientist has put you to sleep, and they've cloned your body. They've put all of the memories that you have, they copied your memories and put them into the clone as well. You wake up, and now there are two people. There's the original you, and, the clone, who has all the same memories that you do, is exactly the same in every physical and mental respect. The psychological continuity answer runs into a problem here. Because if it's just continuity that matters, then what do we say about these people? Do we say now that there are two yous? Which one is the real you? It would seem like if continuity is just what determines if a person is the same over time, there are now two yous, right? Because the creation of both of these yous is continuous with what has gone before. So maybe continuity is not the thing here. Maybe it matters, but it doesn't determine whether or not you're the same person over time.
Isn't this entire thought experiment essentially null and void because it's just the Theseus' ship paradox, which has been confirmed to be a paradox and therefore kind of unsolvable?
Well, we're going to talk about that. But what this thought experiment seems to reveal is that what makes a person the same over time is more than just continuity in psychological respects. There's another condition that we need to add.
But I think that's not really I don't think that's a fair flaw to point out because that's already a logically flawed proposition in the first place.
Oh, you don't. Well, some people think this is like the condition, but
Yeah.
you might think, look, it's this condition plus other stuff.
Well,
yeah.
I just think you take that condition and you use that experiment, that thought experiment to disprove it. If you look at the actual conditions of that thought experiment to make it a thought experiment, it can't disprove it because it's already paradoxical in nature. It's unfalsifiable. There's no correct answer to it, so it can't really be a gotcha question because the paradox itself is meant to be the gotcha in the first place.
Well, a lot of people think, look, there is an answer to this question, an objective answer as to what makes a person the same over time.
Mm-hmm.
And if this condition ain't enough, this thought experiment is meant to show, yeah, there's more stuff that we need to add in order to determine what makes a person the same over time. And so they're going to say, like, look, thinking through this hypothetical scenario shows us it's not just psychological continuity that matters, right? Because if all of a sudden God decided to duplicate your mind and who you are and make a clone right here, right now, in an instant, just supposing that it's psychological continuity that makes you who you are, you'd have to admit, oh, now there are two yous, which doesn't seem to make sense. Because you also would want to say, well, that's not me, right? That's my clone. That's somebody else. But if that clone is continuous in their psychological states with your psychological history, this answer seems lacking then. So the first problem with this potential answer is that it runs into this duplication problem. And although it's a hypothetical scenario right now, it's not far-fetched to think that in the near future, science is going to be able to do this. We're already working on cloning other organisms, right? We still don't have a great understanding of the brain and the mind, but perhaps it's going to be the case someday that we can copy your memories and we can put them in a different body. So then what distinguishes you from the clone? That's what we're trying to answer here. It's a hard question. So what happens when psychological continuity is duplicated? This doesn't have a good response to that. Another issue with this, and this is not actually something that Sider discusses, but this is something that I was thinking about when I was mulling over this problem, is that we presume people are psychologically continuous, right? We presume that there is a continuous series of psychological processes and states occurring in your mind right now. But could we ever prove that? After all, in our own lives, when there is a break in our own conscious awareness, we only realize it after the fact, right? A lot of times you don't even realize you fell asleep, but the fact that you wake up, you then start thinking, oh, I must have fallen asleep, right? So we're not aware all the time that our experience is continuous. Our conscious experience certainly isn't continuous. We fall asleep, we go into a coma, maybe we get knocked out now and then. So it doesn't seem like we could ever prove or show that there is a continuous series of psychological processes going on in our own minds. In a weird way, because we have a mind and we experience the world through the mind and the senses, by trying to analyze what's going on in our own minds, it's like we're trying to look at a telescope through the telescope. You kind of see that analogy there? Trying to understand the mind through the mind is never going to allow us to obtain a full understanding of the nature of the mind.
Well, why not?
Because we're limited. We're limited by our view of the world and our mental capacities.
Wouldn't that also mean the mind is limited?
Yeah.
In which case, we're capable of understanding it.
Well, if the mind is limited, then capable of understanding it only so far as in we're limited, right, in understanding it.
Does that mean
It's a weird thing, but yeah.
Does that mean that the mind is limited on what the mind itself can comprehend?
I think that's part of it, yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, can you imagine infinity?
Yes.
You can imagine an infinite number of things.
I can imagine the concept of infinity.
Right, the concept, right? But there are things that you can't imagine, things that you can't even conceive of, right?
Well, yeah.
So in that respect, we're at least limited.
Well, I cannot imagine nothingness because nothingness is something. And vice
Well,
versa.
That's an interesting problem we could talk about. But my point of bringing this up is that even if continuity is the condition, we can't prove that we're psychologically continuous. We can show with evidence, we can support with evidence, but we can't prove it. And maybe if we can't prove it, well, I don't know, maybe this isn't a good or solid foundation on which to understand what makes a person a person. But you might not think so. In any case, it doesn't seem that we are always psychologically continuous, or at least we can't prove it. And if you really want to experience a whirling thought experiment, check out Boltzmann brains sometime. According to what we know about mathematics, it is more probabilistic that you, with all of your experiences and all of your memories, spontaneously popped into existence just a moment ago, rather than you actually being somebody who is conceived somewhere in a womb and then grew up and turned into the person that you are. Which is very strange. It seems that based on mathematics, objects can spontaneously arise from what scientists call the quantum foam in a way that we think that we've existed for a long time, but in actuality we were just literally popped into existence a moment ago. And there's no way we could ever know that. It's a very weird thing to think about. But check it out sometime. Boltzmann brain.
Yeah, can I say the dictionary definition?
Yeah.
The Boltzmann brain thought experiment suggests that it might be more likely for a single brain to spontaneously form in a void, complete with the memory of having existed in our universe, rather than for the entire universe to come about in the manner cosmologists think it actually did.
Right. Very strange idea. But that kind of provides support for this view that we can't prove that we're psychologically continuous. Maybe we just popped into existence a moment ago. Maybe all this is happening and yeah, exactly. Maybe all this is happening in your imagination and you're not actually existing in a real body. But we could talk about that later. So these are a few potential answers that have been offered. Okay? It doesn't seem like we have a lot of evidence for the soul, so maybe couching personal identity in terms of the soul isn't a good strategy. Continuity in space-time seems to work well for tracking the identity of objects, but it doesn't tell us what makes a person, what makes a person distinct from an object. And then psychological continuity runs into this duplication problem. So Sider then goes on to discuss, well, certain philosophers have run up against this issue, and they've attempted to revisit the question, and perhaps even revisit the importance of the question. Is it even really important to determine what makes a person or the person the same over time? Is this something that we should care about? Does it matter all that much?
There needs to be more potential answers than that.
There definitely are. These are just the ones that he discussed in the reading.
Okay, I was gonna say.
Yeah. No, there are lots of different answers. Yeah. I'm only providing to you today what was in the chapter. But yeah, you can do some more research on your own time. One philosopher, for example, Derek Parfit, who died fairly recently, famous American philosopher, argued that maybe this question of personal identity isn't really worth discussing or investigating all that much. Maybe we're putting too much stock into it. Is it really that important to provide a knockdown, drag-out answer to this question? Parfit suggests that psychological continuity is what we should care about when it comes to the criminal justice system and when it comes to social behaviors, how we should do things in society. But figuring out what makes a person the same over time isn't something that's all that important. And it doesn't seem like we can really answer it. So he suggests that psychological continuity should matter for social reasons, but this metaphysical question is not that important. And we might not even be able to get to the bottom of it. Can't even spell today. So maybe we're just kind of like wasting our time trying to answer this question. Maybe the question isn't that important. Maybe we could just say, look, for practical purposes, psychological continuity is what we should care about. But trying to answer this metaphysical question it's kind of a waste. But there is also another way of looking at this question. We've been trying to determine what makes a person the same over time for many years, but maybe we just need to bite the bullet. Maybe we just need to say, nobody is the same person they were any moment to the next. At every moment, we're a different person. Maybe it's just simply the case that, look, we are not the same over time. At every moment, because things in our body are changing, because things in our mind are changing, we are just a different person from moment to moment. So the person you are right now is not the same person that you are right now. That's a possible answer. It's not very intuitive though, right? Because we talk about somebody being the same or somebody changing in relevant ways. But if we just admitted this, we would just kind of sidestep the whole problem, right?
I feel like for that solution to kind of be valid, wouldn't you have to also kind of define what being a person is?
Yeah.
And what like personhood is? Because if you would say that a person is different from moment to moment, you would have to define what about the person is changing and why that is significant enough to consider that to be a different person.
Yeah, that's one way. You could think like, look, so we actually do need to define what makes a person in order to even say this. Or somebody could just say this by throwing their hands up in frustration. And being like, look, I don't know what the answer is. I'm just going to assume everybody's different from one moment to the next. I don't know what makes a person a person. I'm just going to assume this. Which is something people do too, right? But yeah, that is a good question. Yeah. If we're trying to be, as logical and rational as we can, it would seem admitting this would involve us defining personhood so that we could even cogently say this. But we might just give up on the project altogether and say, it's too hard, doesn't make any sense, screw it, nobody's the same, whatever. Let's stop thinking about it. Let's stop talking about it. And so we're still wrestling with this problem. Philosophers are still wrestling with this problem, at least. Maybe you feel like you have a good answer. But to help kind of draw out what it is that you believe, I'd like to put forth a few thought experiments for y'all to think about and that we can discuss. Because oftentimes going over thought experiments will reveal to you what it is that you actually believe about the question. Maybe you're unsure, maybe it's opaque to you, maybe you don't know. So let's consider two thought experiments. The first one I'd like to consider is the ship of Theseus, which people have been scratching their heads over for some time. Here's how the thought experiment goes. Suppose that the famous ship sailed by the hero Theseus in a great battle has been kept in a harbor as a museum piece. As the years go by, some of the wooden parts begin to rot and are replaced by new ones. After a century or so, all of the parts have been replaced. Is the restored ship still the same object as the original when it sailed into the harbor? Once all of its parts have been replaced, all of the boards, planks, the mast, the sails, suppose all those parts were replaced over time, slowly over time, is it still the same ship once that final bit is replaced?
I don't think so, because it would be different parts. The person, Theseus, wouldn't have even touched the ship at that point, because all of the pieces that he would have actually made contact with are different. Then it would probably be more like a replica than actually the same ship at that point.
Okay, so it would be a different ship. Okay.
At what point is it a different ship?
That's a good question. Is it when the final part is replaced that it's a different ship?
Yeah, I would think so.
Okay. What do you think?
I kind of would think that it'd become a different ship once at least one part is replaced, because as a whole it's not the same, because there are little bits and pieces that have already been replaced.
Okay. Would it be the same ship if, somebody dropped a bowling ball and destroyed one of the planks, but nothing was replaced?
Yeah, because stuff's being taken away but nothing's being put back. So it's still the same even though it is damaged. Nothing is being replaced on it.
So if you burn the entire ship and then you just leave the ashes, it's still a ship.
Yep. I mean,
that's a good question.
In a way, yes, but also no, because it's not functioning, so it's not a ship. It's the remains of it.
Maybe for ships and other objects, function has something to do with identity as well. Yeah, maybe.
I'm confused. So are you saying that, say I walk out the door and fall, hit my head, and completely mess up my face? They would consider that I'd be a different person?
Well, this thought experiment is asking if every part of you was replaced. If over time all of your cells were replaced, all of the matter in your brain was replaced,
Then yeah.
You think you'd be different, a different person?
I think if everything was replaced, then yeah, but then I can also see how if only one part was replaced, I'm still not
Okay.
the same. So I don't know. I feel like both can be true.
Does it matter that this is occurring slowly over time for any of you? The restoration happens over a century in this thought experiment. A board is replaced one day, maybe 12 days later another board is replaced. Very slow process. Does that matter at all? Or is it the fact that every bit is being replaced that's the crux?
Wouldn't it be the fact that every piece, I would think that it would be that every piece is being changed, because over time, no matter what, you're still changing, it's still changing. Like at the beginning of this decade, it was the ship that was whatever it was, and then even though it's been 12 days, that's one piece changed. And then it'll slowly, even though it's like over time, it is still changing, and it's not the same thing. Like once time has passed this decade, it'll be something new, and it will not be what it was when it was first started, just because of them being new pieces to recreate. It's basically recreating the ship, and but I wouldn't think that it's the same ship.
Yeah, I hesitate. I see what you mean, but I would hesitate to use the word recreate.
Well, yeah, but I meant like.
Yeah, just because, like, at no point is the ship being disassembled and then reassembled. You know, it's just like one part is being replaced here, one part is being replaced there. Does anybody have a car?
Yeah.
Has anybody named their car?
Kelly.
Kelly. Donna. Dolores, great name. If you replace a tire on your car, is it still your car or is it a different car?
It's still your car because you own it. It's not like the ownership of that thing is changing, because it's still your car because you're still the one driving it.
Okay, so a few different things have been brought up here. We've talked about
Insert Marxism here.
We've talked about ownership, right? Replacement of parts. Replacement of all the parts seem to matter for some of you. Just replacement of one of the parts makes it a different ship for some of you. But now also I hear you invoking ownership, right? You still own the car, but you did replace one part, so it's not the replacing of one part, right? What if you replaced all the parts of your car slowly over time? Would it still be Donna or Dolores or Kelly?
Yes, it would still be my Donna.
Why?
No.
Why? Yeah.
It's the ownership.
Just because I own it though, like over time, if the car changes if the car is different at one point, like if the car is here and it is 1, and then it is at another point and it is 2, and they're not the same. Like yes, I may still have ownership over the car, but it is not the same car.
Allow me to unironically invoke Marxism here.
Okay, go for
Consider
it.
whether or not you actually own it, and whether or not ownership of an object is an actual thing. What makes you have an actual viable claim to an object that has no personality?
When you sign like the
When you
papers to
sign-
get the car, you
your
have to put
name
your
is
name
on
is
the
on,
paper.
yeah, like on
I
the
paid
titles
for
of
it
the car.
myself.
So it's the
Okay.
deed, or it's
It-
the.
however, does that actually declare on something that is not just created by you? Is that value? Is there any inherent value aside from the value that has been assigned? Is there any actual ownership apart from the ownership that you and another person have claimed?
And does that mean like when I
No.
when I like I'm a okay driver, I tend to just have bad luck, but like if I like hit a tree
I
trunk,
hear you.
like hit a deer and like my back camera's broke, does that mean it's not my car?
No, that just you were driving it and you hit the deer. I'm not saying
But
that
then you
ownership
said
here
that
is
if
car.
you take something or if you
Switch it or replace
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So maybe, okay, so ownership is a difficult thing. Like, what does it mean to own something? You know, maybe we can sidestep that for right now.
Yeah, because like Theseus is dead. It's still the same.
Right, Theseus is gone, okay? But so ownership doesn't seem to figure into it, right? Because now it's a museum piece. is it the same ship though? Some people have said if you replace all the parts, it's a different ship. If you replace just one part, it's a different ship. Why do y'all think that?
I say yes. I think it's the same ship.
Even if all the parts are replaced?
Yeah.
Okay, why do you think that?
I think because I think the idea and the essence of the object has not changed. It's not claiming to be a different ship. It is merely making sure that a piece of history is being maintained, and the maintenance of something does not, in my opinion, does not invalidate or kind of corrupt the essence of the thing.
Okay, so the essence of a thing is what makes it what it is.
Yes.
I disagree with that still. I still think like if there's at least one piece changed from like the original ship, like obviously the material's gonna be completely different than it was then. Like
what if they use the same wood from the same species of tree?
It's still gonna be newer and it's still gonna look like different in some aspect.
It's not gonna be weathered.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And I feel like with like pieces like that, it's like the original piece itself, and it's like that has the history behind it. So like if you would like change it up in a way of like putting new parts in it, so it's like can make it more, I guess, preserved in a way. I feel like then that kind of defeats like the history behind it.
Okay, it violates something when it comes to the identity of the ship.
It's still a ship. I mean, we're still calling it a ship, therefore it's still a ship regardless of what parts have been changed and what has been used.
But is it the ship of Theseus, right?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
still that ship of Theseus, if that's what you're calling it, yeah.
Yeah, let's go to you. Yeah.
Okay. So how I look at it, right? Donna, love of my life, Donna. Not actually.
Donna, yeah.
I'm not hugely into cars, but I love my Donna. I miss her. I look at like names and stuff like that. Like that's arbitrary. And how I look at ownership is like she gets her oil filter changed. That's not like I'm not like you are only Donna if you have this
The same
ownership,
oil filter,
this gas in you, this, you know. How I look at it could be like, I don't know, her whole engine could be taken out and replaced, but it's still my Donna.
So you seem to
It
be
is
kind of
still
latching
an
onto
idea of
this, right? You're like the essence of Donna
Yes.
remains unchanged.
The
So now
spirit
what's
of Donna.
the question is, well, what is the essence of Donna? Does it have to do with your particular relationship with the, if all of a sudden you hated the vehicle tomorrow, would it no longer be your Donna? You know? What is another way to put this regarding the thought experiment is, what makes the ship of Theseus the ship of Theseus?
The name.
Just the name?
I was gonna say the history
the
behind it.
emotional connection.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
Mhm.
is that a mental
The name.
Okay.
I feel like the
Mental.
name connected to
It's
the
some, like-
physicality
like some
of
part of
it.
If you
history.
didn't have a connection to Donna, or really like,
Donna wouldn't have
would
a
it
name.
still be
Yeah.
Donna?
So in
Like,
other words,
Yeah.
the essence?
yeah,
But if
like,
it's
if
Maybe
it
that
has
is what
to-
grounds the essence, is the emotional connection or the relationship. But then again, if all of a sudden, let's say you got into a car accident and your personality changed, and you're just like, I don't care about cars anymore. Fuck Donna or Kelly. You know, I like boats. Okay, I don't want to have a car ever again. Like, there goes the emotional connection or the relationship. You know, so would that make Donna not Donna?
Yes.
Maybe she'll change names and be someone else's.
Maybe she would change them. Maybe it's a different car.
Maybe you name
Maybe.
the boat instead.
Poor Donna, yeah.
No, I'm gonna honestly,
Or-
unironically, completely agree with that. If you wreck your car and you no longer care about what the car is, I'm gonna take the stance and say that's no longer the same car.
Maybe it has to do with what the concept of the thing is.
Like my dog, like Stan, like he like is like the love of my life, but like if I change his name, or if like he has a ton of nicknames, it doesn't make him not Stan. So I
Right.
don't think it's
Maybe you call him Stan, Stanner,
Stanley.
Stinky, whatever it is.
so
Right,
like
but
I
he's
don't
still
think
Stan.
it's the name, it's the relationship.
Okay. Or maybe it is the precise relationship that is had with that thing, or maybe we have some sort of idea or concept of the thing or the person in our heads, and then if that changes significantly, then the person is different and the thing is different. Right? If Stan got into a dog fight and his personality completely changed, maybe that wouldn't be Stan anymore. Because your idea of Stan, your concept of Stan has changed, right? All of a sudden, it's like... This is a very difficult question to answer, right? Because I'm just going to keep bringing it home. What is the essence of anything? What makes a thing the thing that it is? What makes this table? What is the essence of a table?
A name. I think it goes with...
Is it just a name?
No, I think the relationship between the name and the physicality of it is what makes it what it is.
Yeah, so maybe we can't just, describe the essence of a thing in one word. It's like a multifaceted thing, multidimensional thing, maybe.
Because everything has, there's the relationship between the name and the physicality of it could be different. For like the ship, it could change, and the physicality of it could change, but the name is still the name, so that means that the relation that creates that relationship still.
Okay.
Or if the name and the ship, if they rename the ship and they change the stuff, but still try to say that it has the same history, is that the same relationship? No, it's not. It's not that ship anymore, even though it technically would be.
When philosophers try to answer this question, a lot of them will say, yeah, maybe it changes when all of the parts are replaced. A lot of them are going to say it doesn't change just because one part or a few of them are replaced. And the reason they'll say that is well, look at how we talk about things like, think about Pirates of the Caribbean, right? The Black Pearl has been in a lot of fights, right? It's been mended a lot of times. It's still the Black Pearl, right? Even if some boards have been blown off. But I don't think there's an easy answer to this question.
Could you elaborate? Could you expand on the ship of Theseus to the kind of expanded paradox? To the
what do you have in mind?
The original is okay. So you have the ship and you replace all the parts.
Yep.
The expanded one is so you have this. We're gonna call it 100 pieces exactly. And over every single year you replace one part. After 100 years you've replaced every single part. However, you do not throw away the originals. What happens if, after 100 years, you take the original 100 parts and you rebuild the same ship? Which one is now the original ship of Theseus?
Right. Anybody have any ideas about that?
That throws back in the whole duplication thing.
Yeah.
And if you rebuild the original, that's still the original ship of Theseus.
Okay. So then the new one wouldn't be the ship of Theseus, it would be a different ship?
Yeah.
You'd think?
Yeah.
I think that's the only logical conclusion if you actually consider essence.
It matters. It all depends on what you think the essence of the ship of Theseus is, I suppose, right?
No.
Is it the history? Is it, the relationship that people have had with the ship? Relationships? Is it just the idea of the ship in our minds? Is it as simple or abstract as that?
It's like thinking about it as though, if let's use the Titanic as a more modern ship. If every bit of information referencing the Titanic, what the Titanic was, every person who knew what the Titanic was just blow up for whatever reason, would it still be the Titanic, or would it just be a ship that is at the bottom of the ocean?
Yeah.
Then the essence is gone because there's no connection or anything to it. It's still the Titanic, the ship, yes, but it doesn't have any of the history behind it because it's all gone.
Unless maybe you invoke God, right?
Yeah.
God knows all about the Titanic, right? God's holding the idea of the Titanic in his mind or whatever.
That's so cute.
Pull a Barclayan thing here. But yeah, that's an interesting question. Here's an even more, I think this is even a cooler thought experiment, okay? This one was put forth by Derek Parfit. It's known as the teletransporter.
The difference between a person that was transported and the person that's on the other
Yep.
Well, yeah, so listen to this, ready? Imagine entering a teletransporter. This is a machine that puts you to sleep, records your memories and your molecular composition, where all your atoms and molecules are at in your body, breaks you down into atoms, relays those atoms to Mars at the speed of light, and then on Mars, another machine recreates you, putting each atom and molecule in the exact same position that it was before you were broken down. Are you the same person after using the teletransporter? If your body is completely broken down, you don't have any experience of this process, your atoms are relayed to Mars, and then you're rebuilt atom by atom.
You kind of just cloned yourself rather than...
So you don't think you're the same person?
I really don't.
Why not?
It's like it's you. You have all of your like details and information.
Yeah.
And you know everything that you knew before, but you were condensed to atoms.
Right.
And you were reduced to nothing. And then you, at the speed of light, you go to Mars. But you're not the same exact person.
Okay. Because
like, in a sense you are, but you know what I mean. You're not the exact same physical being that you were beforehand.
Right, well, except all your atoms were put back in the place that they were originally. So physically, you're not any different. You're in a different place. But you seem to be kind of honing in on this idea that, look, like, if you're broken down into your atomic parts, there's nothing going on up here anymore. And then those atoms are reconstituted, that's like a different person. It's not the same person that entered the machine. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's not.
Okay.
I think it is. I don't know why, but I was thinking of like a Lego set. You get it, and you build it, and then once you take it apart, it's still the same Lego set because nothing really changed.
Okay.
And then you can just put it back together, and everything is like the same as it was. So, that. Yeah.
Okay. So you would be the same person after being
Mhm.
recreated
Yeah.
on Mars. Okay.
But there's like the question of an electrical impulse, like it's like if you take Deadpool's head off of his head, like he can of course regenerate, but like all of what fires in his electrons in his brain isn't there anymore. So it's like you have the same tubing, I guess, but do you still have the same electricity inside?
So maybe it's electrical impulses that like ground personhood for you in some
Right.
sense?
Yeah, because like you can't recall a memory without something hitting something and then, recalling that memory, because if it's still there, but the electric impulse isn't there, it's not like the same.
So you're saying like, look, like once you're broken down, there's nothing going on in your brain, in your mind, right?
Right.
And then you're relayed to Mars. And then once you're reconstituted, now you're having electrical signals again. But look, you're like, there's a break here,
Yeah.
right? It's not a continuous. Well, there's no. When it comes to psychological continuity, in terms of your conscious experience, it would be continuous, because you're put to sleep, and then the next thing that would occur is that there's a waking up, something experiences a waking up, right? So consciously it's continuous, but in the actual body and mind of the person, right, it's not continuous. Maybe that has something to do with it?
I think you're the same, like, being, but, like, you're a different version of yourself, so, like...
So a different person?
Not like you're still the same person, but, like, it changed you in, like, maybe psychologically a little bit, I don't know. Because, like, like the whole unconscious thing, and, like, Freud and, like, pyramid and all that. So maybe, like, it psychologically, changed you unconsciously.
If we suppose that the thought experiment wants us to, that you are the same psychologically, exactly the same as when you went in. None of your unconscious desires changed, none of your drives changed. Would you say you're the same person?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Does it kill you? Like,
That's a great question. What does?
Because that's what I'm thinking is like all of your atoms, everything about you is being ripped apart. Does that kill you whenever it brings you to like the new place? Is that like I feel like that might be a new person if it's killing you and then just reviving you of a new
Then
consciousness.
how would
I don't
you?
know.
How would
Yeah,
you
is there a break in the life process, right?
How would you consider it then if like, if someone actually like is in the hospital, they die for a little bit and then get revived?
That's where I was gonna
Is it
go
like-
next, yeah.
Are they a different person then?
I feel like it's.
Depends on how they can change them.
So I just don't think the technology would work. I think it would kill you and then you would
Okay.
show up
Kill you.
dead, like the body would just be there.
If it did work though, would you say it's a different person?
I guess not.
Like the person recreated on Mars, is that the same person that you were when you went in it? Or now is it somebody else, yeah? Who has all the same memories as you, same body.
Yeah, it could be.
But the one about bringing people back from the dead, right? That's an interesting one. Because we'll say like, oh, we brought him back, right? Implying it's the same person, right? Oh, his heart stopped for a few minutes. Is that the same person? Maybe it's brain activity that matters. Because even if your heart stops, that doesn't mean that there's no more brain activity necessarily, right? But if totally all brain activity stops, then we can't bring you back. Maybe that's what matters.
I think there's two specific routes to go involving whether or not actual like death or a break in life matters, and that is whether or not life itself has inherent value, and whether or not death itself has any inherent value. If it's
Or you mean to say like whether or not those things have any bearing on personhood?
yes,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
if you don't consider either of those first, I don't think that's honestly a very valid criticism of, or I think it's a very valid criticism of the actual hypothetical, because I think it's just a flaw saying, oh, well, that's technically death. And then that goes into the question of, does life have inherent value? If the answer is yes, then yeah, the question of does it kill you is very important.
Right.
If you think that life does not have any inherent value to it, then that question doesn't really matter.
And I'm going to rephrase again, because value brings in all these questions. You mean to say first we need to answer the questions of whether or not life and death are germane to personhood.
Yes.
Right, before we can. Yeah, I mean, because the way that we speak about things leads us to believe that, if there's nothing going on in here, we say they're not there anymore. Right? Even if you're hooked up to machines in the hospital and you're a vegetable, but there's no mental activity, we're like they're not there. Right? So maybe life itself is not the deciding factor, but something like activity, like mental activity. And when we measure mental activity for people who are in comas like that, we don't see anything, we're like, oh, okay, they're gone. So maybe that's...
The lights are on, but nobody's home.
Right.
I mean, yeah, if you bring somebody back from the life, then bring somebody back to life, and then, yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on their perception, like their viewpoints and all that. I don't know where I was going with that, I'm sorry.
No, yeah. I'm glad to hear all opinions. Yeah.
It's kind of like, how do I put it? Like the Lego thing. If you were to take the head of Professor and put it on mine and switch our heads, would I be Professor or would Professor be me?
Yeah.
It's like
Locke brings this up in one of
Yeah.
his thought experiments. He says, look, if you take, like, the soul of the king and the soul of the cobbler, the shoemaker, with all their memories, and they switch bodies, like, the cobbler is actually the king, right? And the king is actually the cobbler, right? Because their memories, maybe you think memory has something to do with personhood. Locke thinks memory is intimately connected to personhood, such that if all of your memories were erased, you would be a different person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Y'all agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What if
I
only
think that
some
my
memories were erased?
I would think that my personality would be different. I don't know if I would be different, but I would think that the way that I act would be different. Like
Yeah, that's true.
Like I don't know if this would be different, but I know that the internalized, like my inside, like the way that I act and the way that I would be different. But I don't know if my physical would be different.
I agree.
Right. Yeah, presumably nothing much physically changes about you.
And even if it
But-
was, is that because of my different personality, or is that because of something else that was like, you know?
Yeah. So a lot of people think memory is intimately tied to personhood.
This is back to like the teletransporter thing.
Yeah.
Like the two sort of ways that I'm interpreting it is either you sort of just black out, even if it does kill you, and you're just brought back, and you are brought back, or it kills you, you're out. There's whenever it's reconstructed, it's a new being, but it just believes that new being believes that it's the same being. So there's no way to tell, because even if you were to ask someone who goes through this teletransporter, if they are a new person, they wouldn't think that they are.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's distinguish between the conscious awareness that gets put to sleep and the conscious awareness that wakes up with a different color. Right? This would be like person number 1, you, but then maybe the person who wakes up is not the same person because you died, but they do have all your memories and your beliefs and your views. They think that you're you, right? But it's really a different person. Yeah, I mean, how would anybody know if this happened? Right? Maybe this is what happens. Has anybody played the video game Soma?
I played part of it.
I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. But there's a part in the game where the character believes that because he's uploading his memories and his psychic data to a computer, that he's going to like wake up somewhere else in the computer. But that doesn't happen in the game. Like he uploads his memories and stuff, and then he's confused why he's still in his body. Well, what happened is that what he did is he just made copies of his memories and his experiences and stuff and uploaded it to the computer. But he was under the belief that he'd wake up in the computer.
I don't want to spoil it, he says.
I
Continue
know,
to
I
spoil
know.
it.
But no, I'm not worried about anybody else playing it. But so that like how?
So why did you say you didn't want to spoil it?
Well, I don't know. I halfway through I was like maybe I shouldn't, but then I was like screw it. I want to go with it. But so yeah, this is who's to say this isn't what happens with the teletransporter, right? Or for the people who think someday that we're going to be able to live forever by uploading our consciousnesses into computers.
No.
Maybe this is what actually happens, and the thing that's going to be in the computer isn't you. It's just a copy of you. How would we know that? How can we determine that? This thing would have all your memories and beliefs, right? It would think and speak and act like you. It would believe it's you. Yeah, I don't know.
I would like to reword what I meant by essence, because I think it also applies here.
Okay.
I think essence is also just another way of saying defined value.
Defined definition?
Defined.
No, because person.
A defined value is different than a definition?
Well, no, I just mean, yes.
Okay.
I mean that as in, whether or not it is the same or a different person is, and whether or not, like, does it kill you? Is there a break in life? The ship of Theseus is answered, and the answer lies entirely within how you define the value of the thing. The ship of Theseus, if you replace all the parts, is only the ship of Theseus if the person declares it as such. If you rebuild the original, the answer is really only valuable to Theseus, and we don't have an answer from him because he's dead. So the answer is coming from the people who are looking at it. Oh, if all the parts are replaced, you could define whether or not that is or isn't. That's entirely up to you. So and then you have like the teletransporter, if you go into it, it may or may not be a different person. Whether or not it is or isn't is entirely dependent on what you define as a person and the value that that definition brings. So both of these are answered by how the actual answerer defines the object.
Okay, so it's kind of subjective.
Completely.
Okay. So there is no the right answer.
I don't think so.
Okay.
It's a good definition of perception too.
Let me bring up one. Oh, yeah.
I think it's sort of in line with what you're saying, but like the whole one person goes in, new being comes out, but it's you. I think for all intents and purposes that would still be you. It's just not the same.
In the ways that matter.
In the ways that matter, yeah. It would just not be the same consciousness.
Okay. Because there's a break.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah, I guess. If
Like it
that's
has.
the way it works.
I think I know what you're saying, and I think I know what you would say in response. But yeah.
Oh, I was just say I don't really think so, because it would if it's breaking you down to atoms. First, you would have to separate whether or not consciousness is a physical thing, and that goes back to dualism and all that stuff. Whether or not breaking something down to atoms, then reforming it is still the same thing, because you can't break down a consciousness into atoms, or unless you can.
Yeah.
If like,
Let me ask y'all a different question. What if we put a rock through the teletransporter? Would it be the same rock?
Yeah, you don't have to worry about, a rock missing.
It's different than a person.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's the personhood thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you think that what makes a rock is just its physical parts, right? Where the atoms are, the different valences, energy bands, all that stuff. But there's something about personhood that makes this question hard when we're talking about person beings.
If the person is the same, like going into the, like I think of it this way, like the person going into the transporter and the person coming out of the transporter are the same, but like in between that would probably be different because it's us broken down.
Okay.
So technically it would be different, but together it would be the same.
Okay. And maybe there's something weird about this process. Maybe thinking about, is the person the same? Like, the process is confusing things because we're talking about breaking you down and building you back up. What if instead of the teletransporter, the thought experiment was, God is going to annihilate you in an instant and then reform you exactly how you were. God can do anything, so maybe we think, oh yeah, I'd be the same person when I come back, right? But maybe not for the teletransporter. That's a weird thing, right?
In a more fictional sense, and remember when Thanos would snap his fingers, it would erase half the population.
Yeah.
And when people came back, they were the same person after it flipped.
But they also were like aware of whenever they were in the blip, like when they were in that 5 years missing, they remember, and they were like, yes, like we didn't age, but that time in there, like the time in there was weird because they mentioned it about like, I don't remember.
Here we go back to memory, right? Like you
in,
mentioned before.
In the one of the movies or whatever, it's like Spider-Man talks about like, was he gone? Yeah.
Yeah.
He was gone, and it's like talking about like them being in there, and he was like, it was scary. He was like, I don't know like what it was, but he was like, but I could feel that I was not me, like that it was different, like there was something wrong. And even though like he wasn't, like they weren't on Earth, and they were in this like second area, like in the snap, like in the blip area, they were still somewhere. They still had something going on. They didn't just stop. They didn't just stop moving in time. Their brains remember, like they remember that they had, like that they missed 5 years of time, but they didn't grow in that 5 years of time. Like they know that they were missing and that they were together, but and they know that they were gone, but they don't know why. Like everything behind it. So I feel like that has
I don't remember why we brought that up.
I just want to bring up one more thing before you all go. And this is an idea that is being talked about now in contemporary philosophy by L.A. Paul. She's working on this. She writes about transformative experience. A transformative experience is an experience that alters you so radically that by all accounts you are a different person than before you had it. Something like having children, or undergoing, an extremely traumatic event that changes your personality or something like that. Do y'all think that there are experiences that we can have that change us fundamentally who we are?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
What would be some examples?
Death
A
of a parent.
lobotomy.
Say that again?
Death of a parent.
Death of a parent, maybe?
A
House fire.
lobotomy.
Lobotomy?
House fire.
House fire, perhaps?
Who said a lobotomy?
I did.
What's interesting about transformative experiences is that you're going to be faced with transformative experiences in your life. For example, whether or not to have kids, who you decide to marry, if anybody. These will probably be transformative experiences for you. Is there any way you can know ahead of time whether or not you should undergo them? And would it make sense to even try to determine if it's rational? If you're going to be a different person. Would it even make sense to say, oh yeah, it's rational that I had kids? Because you're not like the same person that you were who was trying to make that decision before. And you had no idea how it's going to impact you. It's an interesting question. So I don't know. Think about transformative experiences this week. In any case, we'll go on to another topic. Or perhaps do we have a discussion day on Wednesday?
Yes.
Okay, then we'll just talk about all this stuff. So come with your questions, okay?